And this spring, when our community read team first met virtually to discuss this year's series, we were frankly a little bit worried that people might not have the appetite for this book and this topic. But what we found was a common thread of resilience. Both the characters in the book and ourselves right now, we're having to adapt and adjust to some really challenging circumstances. So when we started having that conversation, I thought about Laura. And so I will let Laura take it away.
Well, first, hello, a warm hello to all of you. Thank you for being here. I want to give my deep thanks to Aspen Words and Picken County Library for hosting this entire series, and also for the very kind invitation to be with you this evening. I also want to extend thanks to Christy Lefteri for writing this very intimate view of the extreme challenges and journey towards hope for such displaced people as Nuri and Afra, and all the refugees that we encounter in the book. It does something so important, and that is to humanize their suffering and allow us to feel with these characters, to develop empathy. It also seemed to really show clearly the fragility along with the beauty of life. Our topic this evening is resilience, and specifically taking practical action towards it. I think resilience is one of those qualities that we all find valuable, and in certain times, especially our current times, as Charlie was referring to, we seek it and we find it essential. It helps us not just in extreme contexts, but also in the challenges and changes that we have in day-to-day life. And it many times, I think, we just hope we'll have it when we need it. And I think we think we'll just find out if we have it when things get hard. Well, we're no doubt in times today that ask for resilience. Developing ourselves and cultivating long-term traits of resilience and well-being may be the most meaningful response to our current times. So resilience, as I prepared for this talk, is such an extensive topic. It has so many aspects. It is studied from within many, many disciplines. Resilience is found in individuals, but also in families and in communities and in societies. Tonight, to simplify and hopefully to offer a program that you really find personally useful. I'll bring some thoughts and some insights from my personal realm of both experience and training, which focuses on mental resilience or training for resilience through developing qualities, really lasting traits within ourselves. This topic of resilience became near and dear in my own life when almost 20 years ago, every member of my immediate family, including myself, my children, and both my parents, all at the same time, had major medical issues, which included a broken back, a brain injury, Alzheimer's disease, depression, breast cancer, a neuromuscular disorder that led to brain surgery, PTSD, and the resulting financial and emotional effects of all of that at once. So when that was all happening, and I largely was taking care of most of everyone in the family, despite my own injuries, that's when I asked myself, how does one move through challenges with grace? I knew there were people who did it. But I asked, how do people cope with such things? How do they have resilience? How do they bounce back and even grow and develop more from experiences like that or others? So this part of my personal journey is largely what led to my career change. Changing, as I sometimes say, from outer sustainability to inner sustainability. I did have a career for over 20 years in sustainable building and community development. And this was a very sensible shift because really even in that career and in those years, I could see the value of inner sustainability or resiliency to face the kinds of challenges that people working in the field of sustainability are facing. So I felt like we all needed inner sustainability or resiliency, much more than we had and much more than we've developed. So in the book, we see Nuri and Afra's life and their community tragically upended. Unexpected change and challenge is part of life, regardless of who we are or where we live. In fact, it is one of the aspects of life that I think we all share. No one gets away without challenges and unexpected change. Life is messy, it's unpredictable. The coronavirus has shown us all that, as has so many things in our lives. So we see proof of this, not just in our own lives, but we see it in all walks of life. There's tragedy, there's adversity, there's suffering. And those with high levels of education, resources, and privilege, unfortunately, are not immune. Those without those things are well aware that this is part of human experience. I think most of us are aware that we do find ourselves in at least some circumstances beyond our control. Nuri and Afra's experience is extreme, but unfortunately not uncommon. And we are all at the mercy of some things that we can't change, even in our day-to-day life. And when we find ourselves here, we do our best to cope. And our methods of coping can be beneficial, healthy, and be helpful, or they can be dysfunctional. We might turn to a good friend, or we might turn to unhealthy habits. Or we might find that our own body copes in extreme circumstances to protect us. And I think we see several instances of that in Christie's book. Afra's blindness seems to be an example of this, although I don't know Christie's purpose in having that as an experience shared in the novel, but to me it does speak to the way that our body can help cope in a very protective way. Resilience, though, versus coping is something that reduces our suffering, even if it doesn't change or fix the circumstances. And when we are more resilient and strong, we have a better chance at affecting or bringing about change. So we have more agency in change for our circumstances when we ourselves are resilient. There's a great analogy that you'll all know, but the idea of putting our own oxygen mask on first. If we don't do that, we can't be helpful in changing things or in even helping others. The more adversity we have in our lives, and I know this from personal experience, and I bet you do as well, but the more adversity we have in our lives, the easier it is to have motivation to develop resilience because the need is as plain as day. But the less adversity we have in our life, we might ask, why bother to work on resiliency? Life is good. I have all I need. And I was thinking about this, and I think there are 3 reasons why this is an excellent time today. Today is an excellent time to cultivate the skills of resilience. And I think first is we never know what's around the corner. Few of us could have predicted a global pandemic or economic challenges as we're seeing now. But if you look at your life and you look at the experiences you have, cars breaking down, getting sick, losing a job, losing a romantic partner, or losing a loved one, are all possibilities that we're well aware of. Any of these could happen at any time. So it's never untimely, I think, to develop the skills of resilience. And it's not to live in fear, but to be prepared, well prepared, with a sense of inner fortitude. So that's the first reason. But the second is that the more resiliency we develop, the more able we are able to be there for others in need. Not crumbling in the face of our challenges, but really being able to extend a hand to others. Developing, in essence, what is called a pro-social attitude and skill to do that. Being able to be part of the solution when times do get hard, like they have been for many people right now. So we get to contribute to the resiliency of others and our communities, rather than pulling back into a sense of the challenges that I have and being drawn in and challenged just by our own challenges. Third, as a neuropsychologist, Rick Hansen, says, while resilience helps us recover from loss and trauma, it offers much more than that. True resilience fosters well-being and an underlying sense of happiness, love, and peace. Well-being and resilience promote each other in an upward spiral. And I think if you reflect on times that you have felt resilient in the face of challenge, the face of unexpected circumstances, that it came with a sense of developing some contentment that I'm going to be okay. I have some well-being. I will make it through this. And that sense of well-being enhances the resilience. The resilience enhances the well-being. I would say too that resilience doesn't just help us to endure tragedy, but clearly it supports well-being in our day-to-day life. It allows us to grow the ability to adapt and respond to adversity, whether it's large or small, major or minor. Sometimes we feel we need resilience when we go to the store and they're out of what we wanted. Sometimes we feel we need resilience when we're caught in traffic. It can be such simple things that cause us to feel spent or frustrated. It doesn't have to be on the order of what refugees are dealing with, but that's when we can also practice. And the good news about resiliency is that studies show that the most common human response to adversity is not trauma, not PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Actually, the most common human response is resilience. So we do have a lot of resilience. Neuroscience also, and the realities of neuroplasticity show us that these are qualities that we can develop more of. We can actually cultivate more resilience in our life. So what that means is we are not out of luck if we don't feel resilient on a given day, or if we don't feel resilient in a particular circumstance. We can develop resiliency. It is a quality that we can practice and develop, which is such good news. And another piece of, I think, very good news, that examples and science of post-traumatic growth show the reality that for many people, coming through adversity can lead to even deeper growth, even more meaning in their life, and higher functioning than before. You may know people who have come through adversity and found that they gained some strengths by going through that adversity. In taking action towards developing resilience, I think one of the most recommended and scientifically supported actions is developing and connecting with meaning and purpose in one's life. When we feel beaten down and overwhelmed, or even if life seems okay, that can seem kind of like a daunting task, to connect with meaning and purpose. And I think Viktor Frankl's words are inspiring here. He said, "There is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life." I found that myself as I came through the kinds of challenges that I was moving through. I was asking, what is meaningful? What is most important? But how do you actually create or connect with more meaning and purpose? You could simply say by doing things that are meaningful. But you could also say by knowing what is meaningful, knowing what you value and living in alignment with those values. I heard in the last event, the interview with the author, I heard Kuteba speak to this in his life. After being imprisoned and tortured, he now is involved in such advocacy for refugees and immigrants because it defines who he is. He said that if he's not involved in helping, he can't wake up and look himself in the mirror. So meaning and purpose can be so important. And we can find meaning in both large efforts and also in small, very everyday moments. Viktor Frankl, in his Man's Search for Meaning, speaks to this in such dire circumstances, but I think we can translate that into our own life. We can enhance our own resilience, certainly by doing things we feel good about. Those things aligned with what we feel right, what we feel is right, what we feel is ethical, and aligned with what we value. I think so often we chase temporary pleasures, doing things that simply make us feel good. Sometimes not always aligned with our values, sometimes not always beneficial, and we can sometimes later regret choices or actions. Doing what we feel good about, even when it's not pleasurable, or even when it's painful, is an important aspect of being able to show up and do things that are in alignment with our values. I was thinking about Rosa Parks. When she refused to give up her seat on the bus, it clearly couldn't have been pleasurable, but it was meaningful. So regularly thinking about our ethics, our values, and actively living in accordance with our values, that has been linked to higher resilience. And as Viktor Frankl also demonstrated and spoke about, that is something that can't be taken away from us, even in the most difficult circumstances. We can still have and bring meaning and purpose, even in the worst of circumstances. We often say at the Mindful Life program that with attention and intention, we can lead a meaningful life. But our problem is our minds are constantly distracted. In one scientific paper that's often cited, titled "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," researchers found that 47% of their waking time, subjects were not paying attention to what they were doing. So that means that almost half of our day, and they found that this is across the board with ages 18 to 80 in this study. And so if that's true for us, almost half the time that we're awake, we're not paying attention to what we're doing. Where is our mind? Distracted and pulled by worries, concerns, and wandering. It's off in places we don't even know. And so here's the thing. We have to be present and aware to bring a meaningful attitude and intention to our interactions and choices. When we don't have control over our attention, it can have some very unhelpful habits. You may be familiar with these. What we pay attention to becomes our reality. If I had one thing at work not go my way, I might exaggerate it, dwell on it, and decide, based on that I don't like my job at all. We can dwell on the negative quite easily. Our attention has a tendency to have patterns like rumination, mind wandering, worry, and even catastrophizing, none of which are helpful or add to our resilience. When I can develop my attentional muscle so that I can choose one thought over another, I develop the ability to notice and shift from these habits that are not helpful. The Dalai Lama says, "Be optimistic, it feels better." But if I have no control over what my mind drags me to think about or worry about, it's really hard to be optimistic. Much easier to dwell on the negative. In mindfulness, we train the attention largely through concentration meditation. By simply attending to the breath, we develop the muscle of attention. When our attention wanders from the breath, we bring it back. And that actually strengthens the muscle. We develop both a stability of attention and a quality of attention that we can then bring to all the moments and interactions of our day. And when we can direct our attention where we'd like, we can remember what's meaningful. And then we can bring meaning to every moment of our lives. Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist, says, "The one thing that is always within your control is your perspective. And with the right perspective, even the most challenging situations in life can become deeply meaningful." When we develop this muscle of attention, we do have more choice about how we attribute meaning to a situation. We're also more aware of habitual, cultural, societal ways of attributing meaning without actively adding our own conscious input. We often attribute meaning from a state of autopilot. And there's a danger of living life on complete autopilot. For example, injustices and oppression are perpetuated when we are on autopilot and we don't question the status quo. Without choosing to pay attention to how our mind interprets our own situations, we can easily perpetuate unhealthy or harmful ways of being in the world, which don't add to our resilience. For example, in a conversation, we can have more awareness of how we are interpreting another's comments or their body language. We can then enlarge the possibilities and avoid narrow or incorrect assumptions about what the other person is thinking or feeling. This type of concentration meditation has been shown to help us to develop the ability to be more aware of the meaning we apply and how accurate and beneficial it is. Every day, you can practice a short meditation and just simply bring your awareness to the breath again and again. When it wanders, you simply bring it back. In that way, we become more aware of what our mind is doing, and we develop that muscle to bring it back. On a daily basis, there's a practice you can use each morning that is quite helpful, I think, and it has a cumulative impact. We use it with students who are training with us, either in 8-week courses like Charlie took, or in year-long programs that we teach where people want to go much more in depth or actually become a mindfulness teacher. And they find that it has a cumulative impact on bringing meaning and purpose into the moments of their life. So you begin by simply recognizing that this is a day that will never come again, which is accurate, but it's rarely considered. You consider then with gratitude all the gifts, opportunities, and the choice that you have in your life. It could be simple, like having clean drinking water, food to eat, and education. In the book, Mustafa says he hasn't eaten sardines for a week, but he's been given cheese and bread and sometimes a banana. He's being accurate about his situation and grateful that he's no longer having to eat sardines. He's moved on. He has the gift of cheese and bread. Such simple things in our lives, but in his, such gratitude. You can expand to the details of your own life, the many things that you have to be grateful for, even if there are challenges. And then, second, remember that things change. What I have in my life today, the people in my life, the resources, the friends, the loved ones, the conditions will surely change. And third is to ask of ourselves at the end of our lives, what will be most meaningful at the end of my life? Will it be all the things I worry and stress over? Will it be the things that I complain about constantly? Or will it be how I lived my life, how I treated others, and if they know I love and care about them, if I made the world a little better place? And with that perspective, we bring that perspective of what is truly meaningful at the end of our lives into our day today, this day that will never come again. And in this way, we can make even the most mundane things like doing the dishes or paying a tip have meaning. We can bring this attitude to conversations with loved ones and not so loved ones. It can guide us in our day-to-day life in how we spend our time and where we place our effort. Now, a friend of ours says he has never had a bad day in his life, but he's had a bad five minutes and he's made it last all day. I wonder if you can relate. We could reframe that same day and say, hundreds of things went well and one thing not so well. So reframing or reappraisal of difficult times is another aspect that makes us resilient. One who's been through a divorce might reframe and think of the divorce as a move towards health for everyone. Rewriting the story of a difficult childhood, we could include the reality that we did develop strengths from it as well, not to negate the challenges, but to see the fuller picture. Stories such as those of Malala Yousafzai I can't say her last name, I'm going to just say Malala, stories such as Malala's, and stories of Nelson Mandela. Think of the reappraisal examples that come from such people. We can practice reframing even in very common situations, such as being in traffic. We might say, as our co-founder says, I'm not stuck in traffic, I am traffic. And then we could remember that everyone is trying to get somewhere and we all want to get there safely. So reframing or reappraisal of our situation accurately and more comprehensively can be another very important element of resilience. And again, practicing in simple day-to-day examples is so helpful. Now, a caveat with reappraisal is that if you're too close to the trauma that you've been through or a tragedy that you've been to, it may be too soon to reappraise. This was true for me. I remember a mentor of mine hearing my story. She hadn't heard from me for a few years, and we reconnected, and she demanded to hear every last bit of what I'd been through. And when I finished telling her, she insisted that I share it with others. And she insisted that I write a book. I tell you, it made absolutely no sense to me because I had not yet found any meaning at all from it. I was still in the thick of it, too close to it to stand back and grow from it and see the growth that I gained from it. So be thoughtful about reappraisal, but use it when it can really be helpful. Now, you also hear a lot about acceptance, especially with mindfulness. It seems it would be almost cruel to say to Nuri and Afra, just accept your life as it is. So there's this misunderstanding often about acceptance. It doesn't mean being a doormat to your circumstances, laying down and releasing any effort. What it does mean is more of an acknowledgement of the reality of the conditions that you're in. It doesn't mean we have to like them. If you've lost your job and are unemployed, it doesn't mean give up and don't try to improve your circumstances. But it does mean the sooner you acknowledge that this is the reality, accept that this is your reality right now, and not ignore or deny or spend time thinking you shouldn't have lost your job or try to change things that you can't change, the sooner you can move towards a solution. From my own experience, much of my own suffering in those difficult times and other hard times came from not wanting the situation to be what it was. I spent a lot of time fighting reality. But moving into acceptance, I could move forward and I could take actions that were helpful, that actually freed me to move forward. Because then I could direct my attention towards what was in my control rather than having my attention locked onto the things that were not in my control. And lastly, there's the question of how do we have resilience when maybe it's not our own suffering, but it seems like it's all around us. We see and hear about so much suffering. I know we all do. On the news, in our own communities, maybe in the lives of those very close to us. How do we not just feel despair, hopelessness, experience burnout when there is so much suffering around us? Coping well with suffering around us, we move from empathy to compassion. And they are not the same thing. In The Beekeeper of Aleppo, that book brings out our empathy. We get to feel with the characters. This actually activates the areas of our brain that have been activated in those that are suffering. It's the same area of our brain activated. Empathy is important. We need to feel those feelings, but it can and has two main but very different outcomes. One is empathic distress. such as overwhelm, over-arousal, and even burnout. Medical professionals know this well. People in the helping professions of any kind know this well. The other path from empathy is towards compassion. Ideally, empathy is the stepping stone to true compassion. Now, you often hear the term compassion fatigue, and that's actually a myth. You can hear people say, my problem is I have too much compassion. What they are really experiencing is either empathy fatigue or misguided compassion, such as wanting to help but not having any boundaries, or being attached to changing things that really aren't in our control. So when we do feel others' pain, we are experiencing empathy, and it is distressing. When we use that for good, actively shifting to the wish or act to be helpful, to reduce suffering, then we are fostering things like love, connection, warmth, and caring. It's very different than empathy fatigue. And this actually activates a different part of the brain, those areas associated with affiliation, connection, and reward. And it fosters resilience in the face of suffering. It can be as simple as a shift from, that's so tragic and I feel so sad for them, to, I'd like to see if there's anything I can do to help. Our whole experience changes when we move from one to the other, and it's energizing instead of draining. Compassion actually activates the part of our brain that moves us forward, that energizes us. It is called an immeasurable attitude, as we can't have too much of it. And ultimately, when we develop it deeply, when we develop it deeply, we can extend it towards all. Think of Mother Teresa and her tireless efforts. Those did not exhaust her, they energized her. So this also, compassion, this also creates a sense of responsibility towards others, which connects back to that idea of meaning and purpose. So empathy is critical, but let it in your life be the bridge to true compassion, the wish for or the act of reducing or removing suffering. And it's important to remember that we can direct compassion to ourselves as much as to others. And both of these efforts, self-compassion or compassion directed towards others, have deep ties to resilience. So I have shared with you some thoughts and practices about resilience. And it's easy when our life does not have much adversity to hear some thoughts like this and think, I understand this, it all makes sense. But the question is, will this make a change in your life? Will it help you to live differently in any way? Will it develop new neural pathways in your brain? Will it develop lasting traits of resilience? A good friend of mine says, you can starve reading a cookbook. So we can have all the ingredients, we can have the cookbook, we can know what to do, but if we don't take action, nothing happens. So we can know all sorts of things, but unless we take action, they don't actually change our lives. Just as we can't have someone go to the gym for us and exercise for us or eat a meal for us, we can't pay someone to develop resilience for us. So this is what the organization that I'm the director of, the Mindful Life program, is dedicated to. It's the idea of helping people to have a daily practice that over time makes real change, transformative change, helping to develop qualities, lasting qualities, so that we can respond in better and healthier ways over time, in more mindful and meaningful ways. And in that, we focus on 4 key areas: attention, which you heard me speak about; values, which you heard me speak about; wisdom, which is the ability to see more clearly and to be able to reframe; and open-heartedness. Compassion is a big piece of that. And so we do this through courses and trainings, but I think most most importantly, through a supportive community that's there 24/7 to connect and learn alongside. And that is another key to resilience: support and connection, which are aspects of our lives that we can make efforts to enhance every day, reaching out, connecting with others, and keeping those connections and support systems alive. So I'll wrap with a thought that chance favors the prepared mind. We can develop the qualities of resilience just a little bit every day. And in fact, practicing with mild challenges, little annoyances, like being in traffic, allows us to be ready for the bigger challenges. And we never know what's around the corner. So I will end with a quote. I think a quote from Nelson Mandela is fitting closure. He said, "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." So with that, I want to thank you all so much for your kind attention, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Laura. Charlie again here, and I am going to speak to some questions that some of our participants have posed. So thank you all for tuning in and for asking some great questions. One is, can you speak a bit to how resilience can be implemented on a community level?
Yes. So we know that when each person is more resilient, that alone builds more resilient families and then therefore more resilient communities. So there's that thread in community resilience. And in that, our social services, our support systems that allow each individual to have what they need to be supported in times of challenge certainly is key. Education that develops practices of resilience is key. But it also is an aspect of the kinds of systems we put in place. When a community is more resilient, they have forethought in terms of what challenges they may be facing. So in sustainability and sustainable building, one of the efforts is around looking forward to the effects of climate change and creating a resilient community by looking forward to those kinds of challenges, whether it's sea level rise and adapting building codes. What is it that we can do on a systems level that can prevent the kinds of suffering and challenge, as well as to develop that from within each individual, families, communities, schools. So I think when I think about community resilience, I think about it from both directions. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, certainly. Kind of like a horizontal sharing, or one builds on the other and vice versa. So I guess in that same vein, someone else asked, what cultures in your experience are more naturally attuned to resilience? And maybe it's too much of a generalization, but what is missing from our country's culture? Do you think this crisis will move us toward resilience?
Wonderful question. I think any culture that has more of an attitude of we than me is more suited to be able to help each other and for individuals to feel supported within the culture. I think there's many examples, and I hesitate to point out specific cultures, but I do think, and really I also think that we are tending more and more towards modern culture around the world rather than what we previously had in history, which is cultures that came from a place. So I think modernization is watering down the differences that we might have seen more clearly in history. I think when we have a sense of me and mine versus we and ours, that does set up some challenges to resilience. We never get through things alone, truly. Although I think our culture has this sense that I can go it alone. I'm independent. And so I think that's an important aspect to look at. And the last question, can you repeat that specifically?
Yes, absolutely. One moment here.
Yeah.
Do you think this crisis will move us towards resilience?
I think whenever there is crisis, there's opportunity. We know we can look to the Chinese symbol for crisis and see that it also speaks to opportunity. I think there is great potential. There's great movement towards moving towards reducing suffering in certain groups of people, certainly the social injustices that are being addressed. There's great progress. I think it remains to be seen whether these types of inner resiliency are developed. And I don't hear people speaking about that loudly enough. So I do think there's great opportunity. I think crisis is when we wake up and we look at the potentials, but there's no guarantee.
So speaking of people speaking about resilience, one of our participants who works in public health says that she's seeing colleagues being threatened, fired, or quitting because of the COVID situation, a situation that desperately needs their expertise. And then her question is, how do you recommend talking to the public to convey that preparedness and resilience are the antidotes to panic and suffering? She says that this message keeps getting lost in the idea of individual decision-making.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful question. I think what I'd love to have right now is some quick little sound bites. I think, that the poster that's been put out, I think in Pickens County, or the image, like 5 things to do. I think, to be able to speak to simple tips to develop resilience would be useful. I don't have those on the tip of my tongue, but I do think that the message about a community coming through together, that the message about reaching out and being helpful to those who are struggling around you, I think that starts to wake us up to, it's not all of, I think we get very me-focused when we're in fear. Fear really brings us to be concerned about what my fate will be, what's going to happen to me. And if we can expand our view and develop meaning and purpose by developing connection, I think one of the ways that happens is to tell stories of people who have suffered with COVID, to bring that to light, just as this book does with humanizing the suffering of the Syrian refugees. When we dehumanize those who are suffering, we can do some pretty harmful things. When we humanize those who are suffering and we connect through empathy, which we almost can't not do, then it activates that part of us that wants to be helpful. Ultimately, we all want to be good people. We all want to be helpful. It's those things that cover up that get in the way. It's the fear, it's the worry, it's those almost mental afflictions that sort of pull us back into just worrying about myself. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. I mean, I can't speak to the participant who asked that question, but I think the idea of using individual stories as a messaging tool, a way for people to connect and to perhaps realize the gravity of a situation is great. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Perhaps the last question, although we might have time for one more after. Someone mentioned an op-ed that Eileen Zimmerman wrote on resilience in the New York Times recently in regards to the roles of caregivers and parents. So do you have any thoughts on what parents and caregivers can do to cultivate resilience for children now and later in life?
Mm. I think it is some of these same things. Allowing children to feel their feelings, to know that feelings come and go and we're still here, that we don't, sometimes, particularly for children, but for adults, a very real experience too, is to feel a feeling and to identify with it, and to also then be to think that this will last forever. So those intense feelings that we can feel in challenging situations, fear, for example, maybe anger, those kinds of things, to help children through those temporary emotions, by helping them understand that these emotions come and go. That is one piece I think we can work with. And I think also helping children to have quiet time, to sort of step slowly into a practice of training their attention through meditation, can be an enormously helpful experience. To not feel like we have to go all the time, to be able to come back and be okay and quiet. That skill is, I think, priceless. I have a son who is a freshman in college right now, just started, and he did learn to meditate, and he does lean on that. And I think for him, it's enormously helpful. So I'll start with those. I think there's so much more there, and there's I could go on another hour about that. I have taught a mindful parenting course, which is near and dear to my heart as well. So there's a lot I think that we can do.
That's great, thank you. And one small library plug, sorry, I can't help myself. Our children's librarian, Allison, is actually putting together a list of resources for parents and caregivers for helping kids with stress and some coping mechanisms for kids that are related to what we're living through right now and in any type of situation that might come up. So we will have that available at some point in the near future. Thank you so much for answering all of our diverse and multi-part questions, Laura. Hopefully we didn't put you on the spot too much with some of those.
Wonderful questions. Thank you so much for asking them, all of you who did.
Great. Well, I will turn it over to Ellie, who is also with Aspen Words, and she's going to walk us through the next step.